He was a very powerful king until he was betrayed for someone he never expected. He thought it was the end, but he reborn in a world where magic exists. Now he is a baby, and he is planning to use all his knowledge to rise to the top. Our protagonist, a man called Gray, he didn't believe that silly myth about when a person has a close encounter with death they can see the light at the end of the tunnel until he experienced it himself. He was watching the city from the top like any other day. He is a king after all, but for any odd reason, he was very tired, so he went to sleep. The thing is that he never woke up again. Someone murdered him. He had no idea who might be. Could be anyone. The truth is that he has a lot of enemies, but that didn't matter right now. He was living it in the real life, that famous light at the end of the tunnel. And the first thing he notices when he reaches the light is that he was being born. He was being reborn as a little baby called Arthur. His parents were those two kind people. Her mother called Alice, who in addition of being a very gentle person and good-hearted, she took the reins of her family. And his father Reynolds was a reliable and charismatic man, but a little childish from time to time. Our protagonist was thankful for being born in a very lovely family, but at the same time, he just went through a suffering that he wouldn't wish to even his enemies. Not being able to control his limbs freely, not being able to control his toxic wastes, and having a weak body that couldn't even take a scratch. Before we continue, I want to make clear that our protagonist's past name is Gray, but in this new life his name is Arthur, so we will name him Arthur from now on. Arthur had so many questions about where he was born, but he knew that these people speak the same language as he does. It was something, but the weird thing is that they all were wearing armor, they carried weapons, and buildings seemed to be pretty ancient. All that made him think that he was born sometime in the past. But his theory falls completely when he sees his mother healing her wounds using magic. That's right, he was born in another world, a world where magic exists. In his past life, he was a powerful king, led armies, won wars, and even defeated every country's representatives in 1-versus-1 duels, but nonetheless he never was so proud about himself as he was now. He just learned how to crawl. Arthur needed to know more about the world he was in. As he just learned how to crawl, he starts to sneak out by night to his father's library. He was in a continent called Decathan, which is formed by 3 big kingdoms. Eleanor, which is ruled by elves and is located deep in the forest. Darv, ruled by dwarves and located below earth. And last, Sapin, humans' kingdom and the most populated out of the 3. Also, this world has a monarchical system. But in this world, you don't get to be a king the same way you do in Arthur's world. Here that rank is inherited. Arthur also finds out that this world is technologically highly underdeveloped. But that's because of magic. In his past world, there is an inner force called Ki that after a lot of training you could use to strengthen their bodies and weapons. Since in this world, there is a similar force called mana. The difference is that there is not only an inner one, but also surrounding us. The most common methods for using mana is to power up or to cast. Enhancers use their mana to power up their bodies and obtain a big strength, defense, and agility. But their weakness lies in their short range, but the spellers cast their mana to the exterior and can bend the environment. Yet they have to supplement their own man core with exterior mana to cast a spell. Normally, spellers can manipulate 1 to 4 elements, but there are some that can cast different spells. They are known as diverters, and one good example is Arthur's mother, who can use healing spells. Something important to highlight is that the ability to use magic is something genetic. Only 1 of every 100 kids are born with the ability to use magic. The first sign of it happens between puberty and the end of adolescence, the time where mana core is revealed. All of this about the mana core seemed so similar for him, just like the key core back in his world. The difference is that in his world, kids were trained to gather every different fragments of their inner key so then they could build the whole circle. While here, they let everything to happen naturally. So Arthur asks himself if he could do the same thing he did in his word, but with the mana core, he closes his eyes. He focuses and effectively, he can see a bunch of little mana fragments living within him, and just as he did back in his world, he starts to gather them all to create a core, though his attempts were always interrupted when his mother noticed. Since then, 2 years had passed. Her mother noticed that her son was a little different from the rest. He loved to go to the city, but not for toys and candy, but to get into the armory. He loved to be there, and also he had this strange vice of sneaking out into the studio anytime he could. Her mother was worried about what kind of man he would become in the future. She had to be a very strict mother to avoid his son to get into trouble. She could not trust in Reynolds after all. The guy wanted to teach him how to fight since he was just crawling. Arthur started studying his father and realized quickly that he was an enhancer. It would normally take him 3 minutes of concentration just to carry some simple rocks. His father used to train in the courtyard, and he often used to make a mess. For example, this time he took out an enormous tree. Her mother came out to see what was happening, and Arthur takes advantage of this to continue his training. During these 2 years, he had progressed a lot with his core, and he was about to make it. Arthur now knew why that used to take up to the adolescence to make it, because these fragments come together very slow. But Arthur forced it, and he manages to make it in just 2 years. The whole house blows into pieces. Reynolds protects her wife quickly, but she could only think about his son. Art is still inside. Reynolds runs as fast as possible, but once he passed all the debris, he can't believe what he sees. A worried Alice gets close to see what was happening. She also gets impressed when she sees what her 2-year-old child has awoken. Arthur felt great. His body didn't feel weak as before until he realized that his whole house had been destroyed. From that moment, many things changed. His mother started teaching him how to read and write. His father taught him the magic basics and also physical training, though it was difficult because of his body. At 3 years old, his father gave him a wooden sword and started training physical combat. He had to train every day, and he couldn't do what he wanted until he finished his sessions. And what he wanted to do wasn't playing video games or read manga, but to keep studying. The level of strength in this world is measured by the mana core's color. It starts being black because of the blood and other impurities mixed when the core is just formed, but as impurities gets filtered, the core becomes more pure. The order is the following: black, red, orange, yellow, silver, and the strongest of all, white. Every color has 3 phases: dark, solid, and clear. That is to say, to advance from red to orange, the person must go through dark red, solid red, and clear red. And their son was an exceptional prodigy, and his father thought that he was limiting his potential by teaching him alone instead of taking him to the right mentor. So he tells his wife that it is time to send him to the big city of Xyrus. Alice completely disagreed with that because his son was only 4 years old, and she wasn't planning on sending him alone to another city, until Arthur gives them an idea to just move out together. They thought that how couldn't they think about that before? So now everything was solved. They decided to leave the next day since their old friends, the Twin Horns, would travel to Xyrus as well. Finally, Arthur could get out from that little and calm town. The next day, a proud Reynolds introduced his lovely son to his friends, Adam Crench, an enhancer specialized in the use of spears, Angela Rosa, a spellcaster specialized in wind magic, Durden Walker, a giant spellcaster specialized in earth magic, Jasmine Flamesworth, that besides being just like a cam, she is an enhancer specialized in the use of double daggers. Last but not least, Helen Shard, an enhancer specialized in magic archery. So now the journey begins. The road to Xyrus City is long and dangerous. That's why it is prudent to travel with company. During nights, the boys protect themselves from wild animals, and at the same time they hunt them to eat. Helen was curious about Arthur, so she starts talking to him. Being amazed by his great achievements at his short age, Adam seems to be jealous and asks Reynolds to train a bit with his child. He says yes, but to be careful, now poor Arthur is kidnapped. Arthur tries to tell to his father to get him out of there with his eyes, but his father didn't even notice. So given the situation, he has no choice but to fight. So using his past knowledge, he gets into combat position and immediately attacks the redheaded. Adam was standing confidently waiting to block the little one's attack, but Arthur suddenly disappears. Adam couldn't believe it. He impositioned himself at his back, and now he couldn't defend himself. But little Arthur misses and loses his balance. The battle continues, and watch this fancy dodge. Just after that, he rushes into his opponent to tackle him. Once in the floor, he jumps to hit the final blow, but Adam was waiting for him with an unexpected kick that Arthur barely manages to avoid. Now it was him who was on the floor. The red-headed approaches and attacks him with everything he has got. Luckily, Arthur manages to block it, but he suffered the most because of his little body. The giant hits the red-headed for exceeding, but the red-headed says that exceeding my ass, and asks Reynolds what kind of evil training he did to this poor boy to making him a monster. But Reynolds says that he actually didn't taught him that. Arthur lies, saying that he learned that from his father and reading some books, so now the other were interested in learning some of his moves and techniques. A lot of days had passed since the beginning of their journey. The training he was giving it to Helen. Adam and his father was progressing well, but the one that had advanced the most was Jasmine. She had learned some Arthur's techniques. She even unexpectedly learned his particular way of running, and with that, the relationship between Arthur and Jasmine was getting stronger. She even gave him a birthday present. Yes, Arthur's birthday was during the journey. While on their way, Arthur was being stalked by Jasmine, who wanted to suck up all of his knowledge. Some bandits attacks them. Angli protects the carriage with her wind magic, and now everyone being mad, they prepare to attack. The problem is that they were completely surrounded. There were some bandits that planned to steal everything they had and to kidnap the women and children to sell them. Arthur was so mad, but her mother doesn't let him out since he is just a baby. On the other hand, his father starts to beat up bandits like if it was a sport, although he almost loses it, but Helen saves him in last minute. Jasmine and Adam doesn't fall behind. They were pulverizing all those madmen, but Jasmine faces a hard opponent. It was a mage who fought with a whip. Being a dagger user, the reach difference was against her. Arthur was thinking about a way to help her when suddenly his father was hurt by the bandits' leader. Arthur hurries his mother to go and heal him, but weirdly she couldn't use her powers as she used to. Reynolds says don't worry, those wounds were not mortal. He even says to the son that once her mother finished her spell, he should protect her and escape, since he had enough strength to beat the bandits' leader, but he couldn't do it if he had to worry about both of them. Arthur refused to escape and tell his father that he can fight, and he knows it, so he would be staying and supporting them, and his father says that the reason why he wants him to protect her is because she is pregnant. Now he understood his behavior during the whole journey, and he now accepts his mission without a doubt. The enemy realizes that Alice was a healer, so their boss orders that she must not escape. Arthur starts running with his mother. One of the bandits jumps over her, but Adam stops him so they could keep moving, and Archer shots them from the distance, but Arthur manages to stop the arrow, losing his sword in the process. The archer couldn't believe what he saw, a kind stopping his attack, but Helen manages to take him with an arrow, and Arthur and his mother keeps running. But Arthur notices something strange. The bandits were supposed to have 4 mages, but he could only see there of them. Where was the last one? And now at the top of the mountain he sees a waterbender. This sucker cast a spell on them. He could stop the attack if he used mana, but her mother would not be fast enough to make it, so Arthur makes a decision to sacrifice himself to save her. But one sure thing is that he wouldn't fall alone, so before being hit he ties up a strand of mana into his knife, and incredibly, he manages to get the spellcaster who attacked them. The bastard tries to grab to a rock to avoid falling, but he couldn't. The giant tries to save Arthur with his magic rock, but he couldn't reach them. Arthur was happy because he knew that everyone else would be fine, but he can't help feeling bad because he really wanted to be an older brother. And while he was falling, we can see a bit from his past life. His old world was a world filled with problems. Low birth rate and recourses were limited. Wars were replaced by grief and armies for kings. Grey was a king, but in truth, the ones who ruled were the council members. They were the ones who managed the country, both in politics and economy. Arthur had enough of that, and one day he decided to leave the throne. He dedicated all of his life in becoming the strongest, but why? At the end of the day, he still was an orphan who lost everything he loved, and if he had the opportunity, he would give it all to go back to Asper and to be with everyone again. But it was impossible. This was the end, Or maybe not, since for any odd reason, Arthur managed to survive. The bandit wasn't so lucky. The problem is that he was injured and had no idea where he was. With little strength, he managed to eat a bit and to drink some water. That he closes his eyes and he goes to rest. When he wakes up, he was feeling better and he can stand up on his feet. He grabs the things that still works, and looking back at what happened, he couldn't believe that he survived a fall like that. He didn't know how much time had passed nor where he was. But the only thing he could do was to keep going. On his way, he hears a voice that was happy to see him awake and asked him if he was all right. There was nothing and nobody near who could be talking. The only thing lying there was the bandit's body, so he got scared and tries to check on him to see if he is still alive. Arthur is relief, but Arthur realizes that this voice was still unknown, so he guards up, asks who was there, and if that someone was the one who saved him. The voice says yes, that she saved him, but if he wanted to know who she was, he had to find out once he arrived home. Arthur asks why should he obey, and the voice says that she is the only one who could take him home. So Arthur's attitude changes and starts to talk to the voice more respectfully. The voice liked that new attitude, so she shows him the way. Now that he knew where to go, he starts moving immediately since the woods is a safer place when there is light. On his way, Arthur starts asking to himself what kind of magic she could use to save him. Also, who could she know where they were going to land? And why did she only save him? The more he thought about it, the more questions he had. On his way, Arthur finds a river and he can't help but to enjoy it a bit. The voice says he is reckless for doing that. Arthur immediately covers his parts, but the voice says that he shouldn't worry. There wasn't much to see anyways. Arthur's pride was hurt, but a king should always be calmed and still. He finally reached the right place. The voice welcomes him. Arthur, confused, said hello to the giant mountain, and the voice says that it would be interesting, but she was not that bunch of rocks. Arthur entered the cave, and after falling, he finally meets his savior. She was intimidating. She was a pick-us. She starts to get close to him. Arthur can't help to be scared, and he starts to get back, but she really wanted to heal him. Then she says that she would create a dimensional portal strong enough to send him home. It would take a long time, but meanwhile, he could eat from the plants and spices she had inside. His appearance was horrific, but the truth is that she was kind. Arthur asks her name. Her name is Sylvia, and now he can't stop asking her questions, which she answers gladly. Where were they? They were in a little zone between the clearing of beasts and the forest. Nobody knows that zone because she has been protecting it. Why is she alone? She was alone because she didn't have anyone to be with. She had many enemies looking for her, and in her last fight, they injured her pretty bad while she was escaping, and lastly, she answers why she saved him. To be honest, she didn't even know, maybe because she was moved by his sacrifice and bravery, or simply because she felt alone. Now she retires and goes to heal her wound so she could start working on the portal tomorrow. But before she goes, she told him that his family and friends were safe. He shouldn't be worried. With time, their relationship grew stronger. When Sylvia wasn't working on the portal, they would eat, play, or they just talked. Maybe she looked like the devil himself, but she was kind and gentile. But she also reprimanded him when he was wrong, just like a mother does. Like this one time, when Arthur showed his hate for those bandits and how much he wanted to kill them. Sylvia hit him, but she says that he is right. They deserve to die, but he should not let hatred and vengeance thoughts dominate his mind, because it will ruin his life. The hours became days, and the days became weeks. Sylvia's wound seemed to be worse with time, but she told him not to worry, that it was normal, that normally her wound would get infected, but nothing to be worried about. She was wondering about his core, because normally humans grow theirs at 12 or 13, so why? A proud Arthur says that he is a genius, and then Sylvia says that maybe he could learn from this. It was about absorbing man and all moving, even if he is very good at fighting. Arthur can't understand how is he able to do that, and Sylvia explains that humans' way of thinking is very flat when it comes to mana, and it is something very basic for beasts. They learn it naturally, but because humans take too long to awake it, they can't manage to comprehend it well. But this is not Arthur's case, and he maybe could do it. So exited, he now starts to practice, but it is more difficult than he thought, but with time, he finally manages to do it. The problem is that when he goes to tell Sylvia, she falls on the ground in a puddle of blood. Arthur immediately runs to help her. He couldn't understand why her wound gotten worse so bad. So he looks at the portal and sees that it's finished. And then he understood she was sacrificing herself to create the portal. Sylvia tells him to calm down, not to cry anymore. They had little time together left, and there was no point in wasting the time blaming himself. But Arthur says how not to. She was dying just to help him. She says that in fact he is doing her a favor. Now she could leave that cave faster, and Sylvia shows her real form. She was a dragon. Arthur was speechless, and even though he had a lot of questions, there was no time. Sylvia had to use her real form to complete the portal. But now that she had showed her form, they would come for her. Arthur couldn't understand anything. But she gets out what it seems to be an egg and gives it to him along with a feather that should hide his aura. Then she touches his chest and some marks appears in his hands. Sylvia says that with this, everything will be revealed at the right moment. The portal was ready. She didn't have the time to make it directly to his home, but he should be able to arrive to a place with humans nearby. Suddenly, debris starts to fall down and a dark voice is heard. Someone had appeared to take Sylvia. It was another Pika. Then Sylvia casted a spell that seemed to stop time, and she apologizes to Arthur, because the truth is that she prolonged the time when making the portal just to spend more time with him, and as a last favor she asked him to call her grandma. And between tears he says to forget that she has to take advantage since the time was stopped to escape from there. He didn't care about the past, but Sylvia says that she can't do that and pushes him to the portal, and while getting away and seeing Sylvia getting far from him, Arthur calls her grandma, and she happy thanks him for everything.